The men had ropes. They had experience. They had 30 years of ranching between them, and they were all standing completely still, not one of them moving a muscle, watching a 58-year-old widow walk barefoot through the mud toward the most dangerous horse anyone in Calhoun County had ever seen. Nobody said a word, because nobody could explain what they were witnessing. Before I tell you what happened in that field, I need to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone do something so quiet, so still, so unexplainable, that your brain just stopped trying to understand it and your body took over instead? That feeling in your chest, that tightening, that's what every single person standing at that fence felt that afternoon. This story is about a woman who lost everything in 14 months. Her husband, her sense of purpose, her reason to get up in the morning. And then, on a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday, a horse that had already put 2 men in the hospital walked into her life. What she did next, nobody taught her. Nobody trained her for it. And when it was over, the man who had been most determined to stop her sat down in the dirt and didn't say anything for a long time. If that kind of story moves you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you're new here. We tell real stories about real people finding real moments of grace in the hardest seasons of their lives. And drop a comment with your city. I want to know where in the world you're watching this from today. All right, let's go back to the beginning. The town of Mira Falls, Tennessee, sits in a valley so green in April that people who pass through sometimes slow their cars down without knowing why. It is the kind of place that looks peaceful from the highway, and mostly is. The kind of place where everybody went to school together, where the waitress at the diner knows your order, where news travels faster than cell service. Lorette Vance had lived there for 31 years. She wasn't originally from Mira Falls. She'd come down from Ohio in her late 20s, following a man named Clyde, who had grown up on the property his grandfather built and had no intention of ever leaving it. She'd fallen in love with Clyde first, and then with the land, and by the time she understood that those two things were inseparable, she didn't want to separate them. The Vance farm was 340 acres, mostly cattle, some horses they bred and sold, a kitchen garden that Lorette had expanded every summer until it wrapped around the entire south side of the house like a living wall. She and Clyde had 2 daughters, both grown and gone, one to Nashville, one to Portland, and a life so steady and full that when people asked Lorette what she wanted, she would say, honestly, that she couldn't think of a single thing. Then Clyde died. It was his heart. He was 61 years old, and his heart simply stopped, the way hearts do, without permission or warning or any consideration for timing. He was in the barn. It was February. Their farmhand, a young man named Bodie, found him and called 911, and then called Lorette. And by the time she got to the barn door, everything that had made her life make sense was already gone. That was 14 months before the horse arrived. Grief for Lorette was not loud. She did not fall apart in public. She went to the funeral, she received the casseroles, she sent the thank you notes. She kept the farm running with Bodie's help, made the decisions, paid the bills. Her daughters came for Christmas, and she held it together so well that they went back to their lives reassured. But inside, quietly, something in her had gone dark. She stopped expanding the garden. She stopped calling people back. She ate standing over the kitchen sink more evenings than not because she was busy, but because sitting at the table for one felt like an insult to every meal she and Clyde had ever shared there. She slept on his side of the bed. She wore his flannel shirt when she fed the animals in the mornings. Nobody in town said anything because nobody quite knew what to say. There was nothing wrong you could point to. She was functioning. She was present. She just wasn't there anymore. Not fully, not the way she used to be. Bodie noticed. He was 24, and he had worked for Clyde since he was 19, and he understood the farm, and he cared about Lorette the way a young person cares about someone who has always treated them decently. He showed up. He didn't push. He made sure the work kept getting done, and he left her alone when she needed it, which was most of the time. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late March, a trailer pulled up the drive that Lorette hadn't called for. It was Stanton Reeves. Stanton ran the largest horse operation in the county, 3 properties combined, a man who had built a reputation for knowing horses the way other people know business. Practically, efficiently, without sentiment. He was 64, big-shouldered, the kind of man whose confidence in a room was something you felt before you understood it. He and Clyde had been friendly, not close, but friendly. He had come to the funeral. He stepped out of the truck looking slightly uncomfortable, which on Stanton Reeves looked foreign, like a coat that didn't fit. "Lorette," he said, "I've got a situation, and I'm going to be honest with you, because I don't know what else to do with it." He had a horse. He said that like it was the beginning of a much longer problem, and it was. The horse's name, on his papers, was listed as Crockett's Ember, a 4-year-old dark bay Mustang stallion captured from a herd in Nevada 18 months prior as part of a government management program. Stanton had acquired him through a trainer he trusted, a man named Garvey out of Lexington, who had worked with Mustangs for decades and who had told Stanton that this particular horse was something different. Different, as it turned out, meant dangerous. Not in the way that horses are sometimes dangerous, unpredictable, spooky, sensitive. This was something else. Crockett's Ember had been worked with for 8 months and had made progress, real progress. And then one afternoon, something had shifted, and he had put Garvey's assistant on the ground with a fractured collarbone and a concussion. 3 weeks later, a second handler, a man with 15 years of experience, had climbed into the round pen and been pinned against the fence before anyone could reach him. That man had a broken rib and a badly bruised kidney and had not gone back into a round pen since. Garvey had called Stanton and told him he was sorry, but the horse needed to go. He wasn't a horse he could place. He wasn't a horse he could in good conscience pass along to someone else to get hurt. The conversation that Garvey didn't quite say out loud was the one Stanton had heard clearly anyway. The horse should probably be put down. Stanton had loaded Crockett's Ember himself and driven him to his own property and put him in a large paddock alone. And there the stallion had stayed for 6 weeks, eating, pacing, watching. The ranch hands had learned to give the fence a wide berth. He had charged it twice. "I can't sell him," Stanton told Lorette that morning, standing by his trailer in her drive. "I can't rehab him. I don't have the time and my men won't go near him, which I don't blame them for. I've got to call into a sanctuary, but they're full until fall, and I don't want to put him down." Lorette looked at the trailer. She hadn't said anything yet. "Why are you bringing him here?" she finally asked. Stanton looked out at the fields. "Because you've got the big lower pasture sitting empty since you sold the yearlings, and because Clyde always said you had a way with the difficult ones, and because—" He stopped, started again. "Because I needed to ask someone, and you were the first person who came to mind, and I almost turned around twice on the way here." She was quiet for a moment. "What are you asking, exactly?" "To keep him. Just keep him. A place to be. I'll pay for his feed, and I'll pay you a monthly rate. Nobody has to work with him. He just needs somewhere to live, where nobody has to make a decision about him yet." Lorette looked at the trailer again. She should have said no. She knew that. Her daughters would have said no on her behalf if they'd been there. Boddy, who appeared from the barn and caught the tail end of the conversation, looked at her with an expression that was clearly concerned. A traumatized, dangerous stallion on a farm, run by a woman in the depths of a grief that had been quietly hollowing her out for over a year. It was not, by any reasonable measurement, a good idea. "Show him to me," she said. Stanton lowered the trailer ramp. "Crockett's Ember came out the way weather comes, not because you invited it." He stood in the pale March light with his neck arched and his nostrils working, and his eyes were extraordinary. Dark and layered, like something was happening behind them at all times. He was not calm, he was not gentle, but he was, without question, the most alive thing Lorette had seen in 14 months. She felt something move in her chest. She told Stanton yes. Boddy said, "Miss Lorette, get the lower paddock ready," she said. Her voice was steady. She hadn't heard it sound like that in a long time. The first week, Lorette didn't go near him. She watched from the fence, the far fence, the safe distance, the way Stanton had made her promise. She stood there in the mornings with her coffee, sometimes for an hour, just watching. Crockett's ember moved around the paddock in long, tense circuits. He didn't settle. He didn't graze with ease. He ate when she wasn't watching, she noticed, and paced when she was, as if her presence required something of him he wasn't willing to give. Body brought the feed twice a day, kept his movements predictable and slow, didn't try anything. The horse tolerated him the way a storm tolerates a barometer. Aware of it, unimpressed, unaffected. Stanton called on day 3. "How is he?" "Alive," Lorette said. "That's a start," Stanton said, and she could hear the relief in it even through the phone. She started keeping a notebook. She hadn't written anything by hand in a long time, hadn't journaled, hadn't written letters, hadn't done more than sign her name to checks and documents since Clyde died. But she found herself writing about the horse, what time he ate, which corner of the paddock he favored in the afternoon, the way he held his head when the wind came from the north versus the south, whether he had slept, and how, standing mostly, near the old oak at the eastern edge. On the 8th day, she walked to the middle fence, not the far fence, the middle one. He came to a stop. He watched her. She didn't move toward him. She just stood there, the way she stood at the kitchen window in the evenings watching the dark come in, not expecting anything, not asking for anything, just present. He went back to his circuit after a minute and a half. She wrote that down. On the 12th day, she stood at the inner fence, the one right along the paddock's edge. He charged it. Not all the way. He pulled up about 6 feet short, through his head, blew hard through his nose. A warning, a clear, unmistakable warning. Lorette didn't move. She didn't step back. Her heart was going fast. She noticed it, but her body stayed where it was. She wasn't being reckless. She knew it. There was something else happening, something she couldn't have articulated. She didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. After a long moment, the horse turned sideways, showed her his flank, which in horse language is complicated. It can be dismissal, or it can be something softer than that. She went home and wrote 4 pages in the notebook, more than she'd written about anything since Clyde's obituary. That night, she called her daughter Willa in Nashville. "How are you, Mom?" "I'm okay," Lorette said. And then, quietly, "I think I might actually be okay." Willa didn't say anything for a second. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She didn't explain about the horse. It wasn't time yet. Word got around, the way it does in Mira Falls. Stanton had told a couple of people about the arrangement, not gossip, just the facts of the situation. And those people had mentioned it to others, and within 2 weeks there was a low-level awareness in town that Lorette Vance had taken in that dangerous Mustang of Stanton Reeves. People had opinions. Some felt it was admirable. Some felt it was foolish. Ora Pell, who had known Lorette for 20 years and meant well in the way that people who interfere always mean well, stopped by on a Wednesday afternoon to express her concern directly. "Lorette, honey, you don't need the aggravation. You're still—" She paused, choosing the word, "healing." "I know," Lorette said, pouring her coffee. "Clyde would be worried." Lorette handed Ora the mug. "Clyde would have been out there already," she said, and something about her tone closed the conversation cleanly. But the visits kept coming, not all unwelcome. Boddy's cousin Dex stopped by with his father-in-law, a man named Farris, who had broken horses in his younger years, and they stood at the far fence watching Crockett's ember move and talked quietly about what they saw. Farris didn't think the horse was unreachable. He thought the horse was smart, and smart horses were often the hardest ones because they saw through things. "He's testing," Farris told Lorette. "He's been through enough that he tests everything first. It's not aggression at the core. It's intelligence that's been pushed into a corner." "I know," Lorette said. She was surprised to find that she did know. That somewhere in the hours of standing and watching and writing, she had come to understand something about this horse that she hadn't been taught and hadn't read. She'd felt it, On day 19, she brought a bucket of grain to the inner fence and set it down about 8 feet from the railing and walked away. She watched from the far fence. He took 40 minutes, but he ate it. On day 21, she set the bucket 6 feet from the railing. 45 minutes. He ate it. On day 23, she set it at the railing. She was sitting on the overturned crate she'd started keeping there, not looking at him, reading the same 3 pages of a novel she hadn't been able to get into, when she heard him stop moving. She didn't look up. She heard him at the fence. She kept reading, or pretending to. She could hear him breathing close. The warm, hay-scented breath of a large animal that has decided provisionally and completely on its own terms to investigate something. She didn't move. After a long moment, he took the grain. She wrote about it that night for 2 hours. She fell asleep at the kitchen table with the notebook open, and it was the best sleep she'd had in 14 months. Stanton came by on day 26. He stood at the far fence with Lorette and watched for a while without speaking. "He looks better," Stanton said finally. "He's eating well." "That's not what I mean." He meant the horse's posture, the set of his neck, the way he moved around the paddock, still guarded, still watchful, but with some quality of compression gone, some coiled spring energy that had reduced barely perceptibly, from maximum to something slightly less than that. "What are you doing with him?" Stanton asked. "Nothing," Lorette said. Stanton looked at her sideways. "I'm just there," she said. "Every day, same time, same place, not asking anything." He was quiet for a moment. "Lorette, I don't want you to push it." "I'm not pushing anything." "You're building towards something." She thought about that. Maybe, or maybe I just like being out there. That was true too, she realized. Something about the paddock in the mornings, the quality of light, the smell of the earth, the absolute requirement to be still, had become something she looked forward to with an intensity that surprised her. It was the only time during the day that her brain stopped running its grief loop. The horse required all of her attention. There was no room for anything else. She started leaving Clyde's flannel shirt inside. It wasn't a decision exactly. One morning, she just reached for her own jacket instead, and she didn't reach back. On day 31, she opened the gate, not to go in, just to open it. She stood in the gateway for a few seconds, and then closed it again and went and sat on her crate. She did this for 4 days. On day 35, she walked in. She didn't go toward him. She went to the old oak at the eastern edge, his oak, the one he stood under, and she sat down at the base of it, with her back against the bark, and she opened her notebook and wrote. He watched her from the far end of the paddock for 22 minutes. She timed it. Then he walked toward her. He stopped about 15 feet away. His ears were forward. His eyes were doing that layered, complicated thing. She kept writing. He stood there for 11 minutes. She timed that too. And then he walked back to the far end of the paddock and she went home. She called Willa. The horse, she said, without preamble, came to me today. A pause. Mum, what horse? So she explained. All of it. Stanton's visit, the trailer, the dangerous reputation, the 35 days. She could hear Willa's concern building on the other end of the line, the questions forming, and she said gently but clearly, I'm not asking you not to worry. I'm just telling you I'm okay. I'm more okay than I've been. I just wanted you to know. Willa was quiet for a long moment. Tell me more about him, she said finally. And Lorette talked for an hour. Day 41 was a Wednesday. It was the kind of Tennessee spring morning that looks like something out of a painting. Clear light, cool air, the smell of everything growing. Lorette had been out to the paddock, done her usual sit at the oak, and Crockett's Ember had come to about 8 feet from her, closer than he'd ever been. He'd stood there, head low, breathing slow, and she had remained perfectly still and just let it be what it was. She didn't know that Stanton had stopped by. He had come to drop off a check and ended up in conversation with Bodie at the barn. And at some point, Bodie had mentioned that Miss Lorette was in the paddock with the Stallion, and Stanton had gone very still, and they had both walked around to the far fence without speaking. Stanton had then made a phone call. By 10:30 in the morning, there were 6 people at that fence. Stanton, body, Faris and his son-in-law, a veterinarian named Dr. Pell, or as husband as it happened, who had been called on a pretext and had shown up to find himself spectating something that wasn't what he'd been told he was coming for, and a woman named Vesper Caney, who was the county's animal control supervisor, whom Stanton had called because he was now actively worried that Lorette was inside a paddock with a horse that had put 2 professionals in the hospital. Vesper had brought a rope. Stanton had tried once to open the gate. He'd tried quietly, tried not to startle anything, but the gate mechanism was old, and it made a sound, and Lorette had turned around. She'd looked at the 6 people at the fence. She'd looked at the rope in Vesper's hand. She'd looked at Stanton. "Don't," she said, quietly, completely. Stanton's hand stayed on the gate. "Please," she said. He let go of the gate. What happened next is the part that nobody at that fence had a framework for. Not Faris, who had broken horses for 15 years. Not Vesper, who had managed dangerous animals. Not Dr. Pell, who understood animal behavior. Not Bodhi, who knew this woman and knew this horse better than anyone. Lorette turned back to the tree. She sat back down. She opened the notebook. And Crockett's Ember, who had moved to the far end of the paddock the moment the gate had sounded, who was standing with every muscle in his body cocked and ready and his eyes on the fence, began to walk toward her. He was not slow. He was not creeping. He walked with his full stride, his head coming down incrementally as he covered the distance, and the people at the fence went very still, the way people go still when something is happening that they know they could ruin. He walked to 8 feet, then 6, then 4. He stopped at 4 feet, and his head came down, and his ears went soft, and he breathed once, a long, slow exhale that you could see in the cool morning air. And then he took the last steps. He put his nose to the top of Lorette's head. She didn't move. She didn't turn. She sat against the tree with her notebook open and her breath even, and she let him do it. Let him smell her hair, her jacket. Let him figure out whatever it was he needed to figure out. He stood there for a long time. At some point, nobody could say exactly when, Lorette raised her right hand and placed it very lightly against the side of his face. He didn't pull back. She didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the notebook, kept her breathing steady, and held her hand against his jaw the way you hold something that might break, and didn't move. At the fence, nobody said anything. Stanton, who had been a rancher for 40 years and had seen things that moved him and things that didn't, found that he couldn't look directly at it. He looked slightly to the side, the way you look at something bright. Bodhi had both arms hooked over the fence railing and his chin resting on them, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't know when that had happened. Vesper still had the rope, but her arm had dropped to her side. It went on for, nobody agreed afterward how long, 4 minutes, 7. Faris said it was closer to 10. Dr. Pell didn't say anything about the time at all. He said later that he stopped thinking about time at some point during it. What he did say was this: in 30 years of working with animals, I have never seen a horse choose the way that horse chose. When it was over, when the horse lifted his head and stepped back and walked calmly to the water trough, Lorette sat at the oak for another few minutes. Then she stood, closed the notebook and walked to the gate. She opened it, stepped through, closed it behind her. She turned around and found 6 people looking at her. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Stanton sat down in the dirt, not dramatically, not in distress. He just sat down in the dirt at the base of the fence post, like his legs had decided they were done holding him up for the moment, and he sat there with his forearms on his knees. "Lorette," he finally said, "what did you do?" She looked back at the paddock, at the horse who was drinking with his ears relaxed and his back foot cocked. "I don't know," she said. "I just showed up." The story, of course, got out. Mirror Falls is a small town, and there had been 6 witnesses, and by the weekend, everyone knew some version of it. The versions varied. Some had Lorette touching the horse sooner. Some had Stanton intervening more dramatically. One version had the horse rearing up, and Lorette somehow calming it from 6 inches away, which wasn't accurate, but wasn't entirely metaphorically wrong either. What people latched onto, Lorette noticed, was the idea that she had done something remarkable. Something skilled, something intentional, a technique or a talent or a gift. She kept trying to explain that it wasn't any of those things. She wasn't sure she succeeded. Stanton began coming by every week, not just to check on the horse, to check on Lorette, though he wouldn't have said it that way. He'd have said he was checking on the situation. They'd stand at the fence together in the mornings with their coffee and watch Crockett's Ember and not always talk. Lorette found she didn't mind that. Stanton was the kind of person who understood that silence between people could be companionable rather than empty. Farris came back twice with a request. Could he watch? Could he bring a young horse he was struggling with? Lorette thought about it for a week and then said yes, and what happened with Farris's horse during those 2 visits became its own separate story that people in the county talked about for a while. Dr. Pell wrote something up for a regional veterinary journal, not about Lorette by name, but about what he had observed about the horse's response and what it suggested about equine stress and trauma. He showed her a draft and she said it was fine. She thought it was interesting. The science of it didn't explain the things she'd felt, but she wasn't sure the things she'd felt needed to be explained by science. Her daughter Willa came down in May. She stood at the fence and watched her mother walk into the paddock and sit at the oak tree and wait, and she watched the horse come, and she watched her mother's hand go to his jaw, and she stood at the fence for the entire thing without saying a word. Afterward, driving to dinner, she said, "You look different, Mom." "Different how?" Willa kept her eyes on the road. "Like yourself," she said. "Like exactly yourself." Crockett's Ember stayed through the summer. By August, he was taking grain from Lorette's hand. In September, she put a halter on him for the first time, not without difficulty, not without days of preparation, but without anyone getting hurt. By October, a trainer named Hadley Pruitt, who specialized in formerly wild horses and who had heard about the situation through 3 degrees of separation, drove up from Chattanooga to consult. She spent 2 days at the farm and said that what Lorette had done, the patience, the consistency, the complete absence of agenda, had given this horse something that professional rehabilitation often failed to provide. "You weren't trying to fix him," Hadley told her. "No," Lorette said. "That's probably why it worked." And during the following spring, Crockett's Ember was ready for what Stanton had originally hoped for. Not a working ranch horse, not a performance animal, but a horse that could be managed safely, that could live a decent life, that could be touched and led and cared for without danger to anyone around him. He didn't go back to Stanton's. By then, it was obvious to everyone, including Stanton, that the horse and the woman had reached some kind of agreement, and breaking that agreement seemed inadvisable for reasons that were more instinctive than logical. Stanton adjusted the financial arrangement without being asked, and Lorette accepted it without argument, and Crockett's Ember stayed in the lower paddock of the Vance farm, which began, slowly, to be considered his. Lorette expanded the garden again that spring. Not all the way around the house, not yet, but she opened up the eastern beds that had gone fallow and put in tomatoes and pole beans and a long row of sunflowers along the fence that faced the paddock. She told herself the sunflowers were just there. She knew privately that she'd planted them where the horse could see them from his oak tree, and she was fine with knowing that. She went back to calling people. Not everyone, not all at once, but she started returning calls she'd been letting go to voicemail for more than a year. She met a friend for lunch. She drove to Nashville to see Willa for a long weekend. She cleaned out Clyde's closet, kept the flannel shirt, gave the rest to the church thrift store, felt the weight of it and then felt something on the other side of the weight. Body noticed all of it. He didn't say much about it, because he understood that Lorette didn't need commentary on her own life. She needed someone to show up and do the work alongside her, which is what he kept doing. But one afternoon in June, when they were fixing a section of fencing in the north field, and the day was long and golden and Lorette was laughing at something, genuinely laughing the way she used to laugh when Clyde was alive, he let himself feel relieved in a way he'd been holding back for a year and a half. The notebook she'd filled during those 41 days sat on the kitchen shelf. She didn't look at it often, but she kept it there. Sometimes, when something was hard, When the grief came back the way it always does, in waves on ordinary days like Tuesdays, she would take it off the shelf and hold it, not even open it, just hold it. The feeling of it reminded her of sitting at the base of an oak tree in the March mud, with her heart going fast and her body staying still, waiting for something wild and broken and magnificent to decide whether the world was safe, and of the moment it had decided yes. There are things in life that can't be taught and can't be explained and can't be replicated, and the wisest thing you can do with them is refuse to ask them to make sense. Just receive them. Just hold them in your hands, carefully the way you hold anything that matters. That's what Lorette Vance learned that spring, not from a book, not from a teacher. From a horse that had every reason not to trust anyone and had chosen one cold morning to trust her anyway. I've been sitting with this story for a while, and what keeps coming back to me is something Lorette said to a friend months later, when the friend asked her if she'd ever felt afraid out there in that paddock. She said, "Every day. But there's afraid and running, and there's afraid and still, and I was learning to be the second kind. Afraid and still." I think about how many situations in life call for exactly that. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand in it without letting it move your feet. Lorette wasn't brave because she didn't feel fear. She was brave because she'd been through the hardest 14 months of her life, and she had learned, at the bottom of it, that she could survive being afraid, that she could be present in the face of something overwhelming and not disappear. The horse knew that. Somehow, in whatever language horses understand these things, he knew it, and he came to her. If this story meant something to you today, please leave a like. It helps more people find these stories. Share it with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments what it brought up for you, or just where you're watching from. I read every single one. We'll be back soon with another story. Until then, show up, stay still. Let the hard things find you trustworthy. Take care of yourselves.